All right, welcome to the Scrum Power Hour. I'm Patty. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to get this meeting going and start to talk about one of my favorite topics, systems thinking. All right, so why you struggle to remove impediments. Now, I put you in the title very specifically because we often feel like we're alone, and we often feel like it's up to us individually to solve the problem. And we sometimes feel like it's all of our faults, but it's not. Today, we're going to have a great discussion on systems thinking to help you rethink, pun intended, how to look at the impediments in your organization and how to think differently about approaching them. All right, so most of you know me, Patty, from LinkedIn. That's how you showed up here today. I'm the founder of Agile Mindset Consulting. As I mentioned before, after Drew spoke, I do have a non-technical background. So my first career was a science teacher. Now, I love data. I love coming up with experiments and hypotheses and studying things. So I have a passion for empiricism. And that's what initially led me to go down this path of Scrum mastering and Agile coaching. So I'm a Scrum Master career coach. I'm passionate about helping that role, but I want to help Scrum Masters interact with all roles in an organization, because at the end of the day, this is a group effort. It's not just on the Scrum Master, it's not just on the leaders, it's on all of us to transform our organizations. So I do Scrum group training and coaching. And I also go into companies and I help them assess their transformation, where they are, because as you'll see today, the things that are on the surface, the things that are easy to address are often not the root cause of the challenges. So I help them see those things, bring them to the surface, and then move through them and take some next steps to move the needle. So our backlog tonight. We've kind of hit the introduction and the welcome. I'm going to be showing a brief video. Maybe some of you have seen this before, but it is related to systems thinking. It's a cute little cartoon. It's about 3 minutes long. And then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms and I'm going to give you some prompts to have you discuss. So let's get that video going. And I'm going to stop my screen and share my other screen so we can get that going.
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars, thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon the DIAC people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
So you can see very clearly a simple problem ended up being quite a ridiculous solution. There we go. All right, so let me share my other screen now. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to put a link to this slide. It's saved in a Google Doc, so you'll have it as a reference. I'll put the link in the chat in just a moment. But here's what you're going to talk about in your breakout room. And I think I increased this a bit. Okay, so we're going to go into rooms about maybe 3 or 4 people. We'll see how many people we have here today. I'd like you to introduce yourselves, of course, your name, where you're from, a little bit about your background, and then I'd like you to discuss the video. So what was the original problem? And maybe some of this got lost, but see if you can remember all of the information. What was the solution of the World Health Organization? And what was the, all the downstream unforeseen consequences that occurred, including the ones that might have been delayed a bit. So that might have confused people, whether that was related or not. How did the fiasco end up getting solved? What is your takeaway from this? And then how would you have handled it differently so we didn't end up with that crazy solution at the end? Then what I'd like you to do is relate this to a situation that you have seen at a company that you've worked at. So it's something maybe in the present, something in the past, but where have you seen a quick fix to a problem that you know was much bigger? What were the downstream effects? And what do you think might have been a better choice for the organization to do? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I will put the slide in the chat so you can make sure you can grab it before you leave. All right. And I'll hang out here in case some folks get kicked out and have to put you back in the room. But I'll see you in about 15. So we can get the rest of the stuff. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about what we discussed in our breakout rooms. So which group would like to go first? Why don't we start with the video discussion before we get into the company challenges you faced?
So Latasha and I were in a group, and I think the biggest takeaway for us was take notes. I'm halfway kidding, but I'm halfway serious. So many times we'd come into a meeting and just kind of plop down and just ready to digest, but then you can't remember, and then all of a sudden nobody remembers everything that went on. So somebody kind of needs to capture the meetings of the minutes, because it was hard to remember with that many levels of detail what all went on.
Yeah. So you can see when you have all these fast moving parts and things that are constantly changing and things beget other results, right? It's hard to keep track of what actually the problem is. So where did your group struggle with that? What can you remember?
So what we tried to remember was the original problem was malaria, right? Okay, and so the World Health Organization introduced, was it butterflies they introduced to extinguish the mosquitoes? We were a little fuzzy there. Then somewhere along the line, the rats came in to maybe extinguish the butterflies. There was a gecko in there somewhere, and then rats, and then cats ate the rats, but the rats were infested with DDT, so they died. And yeah, we were just trying to put the pieces together, and between the two of us just using our memory, we couldn't remember.
And how often does this happen in an organization?
What did we talk about last time?
All right, well, let's see. Another group. Can you fill in the gaps there? Can you, I don't know. What did you remember?
I'll jump in. So it was the DDT, the initial release of DDT that caused the chain of events that led to the increase in rats and malaria because of the DDT poisoned the wasps and the cats, and there was a third thing that I forget what else they poisoned, but and so then it led to the Operation Cat Drop, which I'm curious how the cats felt about that.
Well, in the video, they look pretty excited. All right. Anybody fill in any gaps there? What's the story?
Well, there was one part that I had forgotten, and Art brought it up, was about the worms eating the thatch roof and those collapsing in. But with the DDT, it killed the mosquitoes and the geckos. I couldn't remember if they ate the worms or not, but I know that they were poisoned, but not affected by the DDT. And the cats ate the geckos, and the cats died, and then the rats infested and brought the plague. And that's when they had to drop in the cats, the Borneo.
We're getting closer. Anybody else want to fill in any other details?
For me, it was just the focus was all over the place, and it was needing to be like the focus just needed to be kept on the purpose of the video, not all over the place.
Yeah. So with all this in mind, right, we still don't know the straight story, right? We still don't know exactly what happened. We know it started out with one problem and we ended up parachuting cats down on the island, which is crazy when you think about it. Because would a company think in the very beginning that that's where they would end up? Probably not. And all of the downstream effects and how much time and money this must have cost. So with that being said, does anybody have a better solution? How would you have handled this?
We talked a bit about design thinking, where instead of going straight to it and dumping DDT all over the land, right? You'd want to be able to create fast cycles of failure that would allow for teams to get some quick feedback to figure out if what they were doing was desirable, feasible, or viable, right? And that if we had multiple teams, maybe focusing on different areas of Borneo as their test site, that each of those teams could create failure experiments that would hopefully guide us towards an optimal solution.
Yes. So this is where you can see like Agile comes into play. Anybody else?
So Patty, just one observation, what we were talking about. So I think Latasha may have left. I don't see her here, but it almost sounded like they were just whoever proposed a solution, it's like, yeah, let's do that. Instead of saying, well, that's one solution. That's one way to solve the problem. Let's look at what all the options are, and then let's try one, as Drew said. Let's experiment and see how well that works, and not just go after the first thing that comes out of. And I don't know, my experience, that happens many times in business, is that the first solution mentioned is the one that everybody latches onto, and it's like, okay, we're done with this meeting. Let's go.
Yes. And sometimes that solution is from the most vocal person, the person that's paid the most money, that has the biggest title. And, understandably that, that person has a lot of experience and they probably just want to get it fixed, right? Because to your point, this is a business. We're not talking about an island anymore. We're talking about a business. So the business, is designed to put out a product and get money in return, right? And that's why we all have jobs. So let's jump into the third question then. Let's relate this to things that you have seen at your company. Now, we're all coming from, again, different roles, different backgrounds. This could be at any company at any point. Where have you seen a solution thrown out, people jump on it? It probably just took care of a top level symptom, but then a series of events happened and we created a larger problem. And then what? So does anybody have a story that they want to share about this?
I have a software development kind of situation where I was a product manager over an investigative case management system for welfare fraud. And essentially, there were two phases of an investigation. There was a referral stage where the investigator had to validate that it was legitimate, and then a full-scale investigation. And so the boss over the investigators was like, well, I'm going to change the referral stage, add more data, alter these fields to match legislative mandates, and you just have to do it. And we did, but they didn't think about this is a workflow. It's all connected. There's data tables behind there connected to this data. Like, where is it going? And then it disrupted the workflow of the investigative process. And we didn't think about those dependencies and kind of our BAs didn't do an impact analysis of that change. So we had to roll back that deployment, which for me, being the product manager and kind of over everything, was a blow to my ego. But also I was like, I knew that I should have taken more time, but it was a rush because when it's government and legislatively mandated on the Moscow scale, that's always a must. We have to do it immediately. So that was, in hindsight, it just makes me more cautious when it comes to the downstream effect of quick changes in a system, especially a complex system.
Did anybody speak up and say, maybe we should take a step back and think about this?
Actually, no, because in that circumstance, they were used to waterfall and we'll deliver a plan and that's all that matters. And so they are used to being tight-lipped. And so that was something that I had to implement about speak up. You have to speak up in this environment or else this will happen, which makes more work for you as well. So.
Yeah. And I guess my last question is, at the end of this all, was there any kind of retrospective or action items to maybe rethink that behavior pattern?
For us, we involved actually our BAs and QA testers more in some of our ceremonies, because a lot of times they were left at the end and delivered directives like, these are use cases, figure it out if it's good, as opposed to having their mind in the beginning. They have a different mindset of like, oh, when we test this, we look at this, and this could have a downstream effect. So that was just a kind of shift in our structure.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think, things happen, mistakes are made, but I think one of the benefits of Agile, we specifically talk about Scrum in this meetup, but Agile in general, is that there is that retrospective piece. And to learn from this situation and make improvements, even if they're small, right? Cherish, we were talking about that. Even if they're small and incremental, that is really important. That's what we're trying to drive here. So thank you for sharing that, Stephen.
Yeah, and it was a huge cultural shift because the set was getting silent and just deploying the most effective code knowingly just to like fulfill a need. And I was like, we can't do this anymore. You have to speak up. Like, you won't get fired, I swear.
Psychological safety. Right, that's the bottom line of everything. Excellent. Anybody else have any stories? Yeah, value of courage. Anybody else have any stories to share regarding this?
I have one that kind of correlates. This was about 20 years ago. It was early in my career. My first client back then was oddly enough the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and the ad agency that I worked for had been contracted to create a brand new website. Their site was gf.org, the shortest domain I've ever had the privilege of working on. And prior, their website was one page, and it was like a 7-mile long scroll. And so we custom built this amazing Ruby on Rails solution for them with to highlight the 70-something years of fellows. And I made a big mistake. I was the executive producer, and I was demoing it to the president of the Guggenheim Foundation to show him how easy it was for him to build a profile. And he created a dummy profile and called himself the sanitation director. And so I went back to my office and I deleted it. And a couple of weeks later, we did a code rollback. And when we did the code rollback in the database, it captured his profile. And so when we went to launch the site, and he called all the board members of the Guggenheim Foundation to come look at this brand new website in like 2005 or 6 or something like that, the first profile that popped up was the president's profile, labeling him as the sanitation director. Now, for years after that, I fell on my sword. I felt like I had this badge of shame. I'm a bad producer, or bad, technologist, and as a result, I didn't go for the jobs that were hard, were reaches for me. I went for the safe ones that, But then I had a friend of mine pull me aside one day, many years later, about 3 years later, and he was talking about this story about how like I wanted more out of my career and whatnot, and but I felt bad about myself because of this thing. And he's like, Drew, you tried something. Right? You put some data together, you tried it, it didn't work out well, right? You learned something from it, and now you're going to move on with that new information and do something differently. And, it helped me to realize that in everything I do, I'm going to be making mistakes, and that I don't need to carry that with shame. As long as I've learned something from it, I have a new hypothesis for what I want to do differently next time. And that's a place of confidence and strength that I made that mistake now. So it's a little tangential, but I felt like that's a story I like to tell.
Yeah. Can anybody else relate to that?
Okay, now you guys make me feel shameful. Just kidding.
We all don't make mistakes. Just you, Drew. No, it is. It's challenging. I mean, that's the type of environment that we all strive to work in, and the culture that we want to develop, but it doesn't always exist, right? And Stephen, like what you were sharing before, sometimes we have to go in and develop that. And I don't know what your culture was like, Drew, that you were working in, but obviously somebody felt like they could say those things to you.
Yeah, actually,
okay.
they straight up they fired me. They totally fired me. This was years later. A really good friend of mine and a mentor and a colleague, had realized that I was kind of like stagnating a bit, and peel back the layer of the onion with me. But that was not good culture there, and I was too young and inexperienced to really know what to make of that. I had just gotten out of the Navy too, and it was all about honor. And I felt like the honorable thing to do would be to tell everybody I made a mistake. So.
Well, I think then is really the flip side, right? I mean, we want to work for an organization where you can admit your mistakes and not get fired, because we're not machines. But this is why some people, jump to these quick symptom relieving solutions, because there's an appearance of things are fixed, things are better. But the fact of the matter is the dirt is still underneath the carpet. So it takes more to cover those symptoms, because they get worse and worse. But if there's not a culture of safety, you can't ever address the root cause of the problem. So in looking at that video, the idea would be the World Health Organization would say, let's set up all of these experiments, but you could clearly see like that was not the culture there. And what happened as a result, unfortunately. But thank you for sharing that, Drew. I think it takes a lot of personal growth to realize that it's okay, but also another step of personal growth to sit in front of a group of strangers and be able to get to the point where you can talk about that. Great. Is there anything else that anybody would like to share? Well, there you go, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. Everybody feel free to drop their LinkedIn URL into the chat. Connect up with everybody, continue the conversations. This Scrum community is very supportive, and everybody wants to help each other. There are those trolls, right? Out there. But for the most part, people really want to help everybody succeed, because we're in this together, right? We can't solve these big organizational challenges unless we feel safe to talk about them, and we can have the courage to try something new and not jump for the solution that seems so obvious, that we know is not going to work. All right, well, any last words that anybody wants to say, share before we head out? Drew, your hand's up.
Yeah. Oops, there we go. Yeah, I just wanted to add, to what I said earlier, actually. Psychological safety is important, right? It's the foundation that we stand upon that enables us to take the kinds of risks that our employers need us to take in order to be innovative and successful. But as Scrum Masters and coaches, and I do believe that Scrum Masters are coaches, they're just coaches to a smaller group of people, we have to create that ourselves sometimes. And what I've learned is that sometimes you don't even need that at all, right? Like, I have been let go. I've had my contract not extended, right? It didn't work, right? What did I learn from that engagement? And so what I tend to do now is when I start engagements, I look at it as, how can I improve my abilities and capabilities as an Agile coach as one of the primary goals for that engagement? Because if I can become a better coach during that engagement, my clients and my organizations are obviously receiving value. And so as an example, it was my first enterprise level transformation engagement where I was flying solo. And I was in London. They flew me to London, and 2 or 3 days after I got there, the lead coach quit. And I became the lead coach. And I was there for about 6 months. And then finally they pulled me aside one day and they said, look, the project sponsor here they're saying that they're not vibing really well with you. And they weren't, right? We were not gelling really well. I was gelling great with a lot of people, but my relationship with her was on the rocks. And a previous version of me would have felt bad. Like, what did I do wrong? Right? Am I not good enough? Right? Why couldn't I have figured this out? But they had said to me, we want you to stay for another month so that we can find your replacement. And I realized I was like Schrodinger's agile coach. I was both dead and alive at the same time. And what I did in that month both mattered and didn't matter at all. Right. And I had every day to go into work to kind of create a new failure experiment each day. Could I reinvent my communication style to kind of get through to her? And it wasn't for the sake of me trying to save my job, right? It was because I knew that I was going to experience this impediment again and again and again until I figured out a new way of communicating. And the beauty there was I got to learn so much because I didn't have the stress anymore of worrying about the judgment of somebody else on my performance, right? And to me, that's where the real power comes from when you're in organizations where you're the only one who gets it, or where they're not providing the psychological safety for you. You've got to figure out a way to provide it for yourself. And if not giving a hoot is the only tool that you can use, then do that, because you need to be able to have that freedom of space to develop that confidence. So I just wanted to take it a step further because I don't want to leave it at just that. But
Excellent. Sometimes we're our own impediment, and it's recognizing that and moving beyond them that makes us a stronger coach. And to your point, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, we're all coaches. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that, Drew. All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thank you for showing up. I know we're getting towards the end of the year. Things are getting busy, and it becomes more and more difficult to show up for yourself, show up to meetups, keep your learning going. So we all appreciate that you were able to make it tonight, and I will see you next time.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.